Welcome and thank you for tuning into this webinar. My name is Michael Collins and I'm the Executive Director of Irish Community Services, an immigration and social services provider based in Chicago but servicing the Midwestern region of the United States. It is my pleasure to welcome Kristin Hartsaw from the DuPage Foundation to present to our community on public benefits and unemployment eligibility and overview. Kristin is the Program Director of Training and Technical Assistance at the DuPage Federation. And in this role, she educates providers and the community on programs such as Medicaid, SNAP, and more. This webinar is being organized as a response to the uncertainty caused by the COVID-19 crisis. This crisis has left many people in our community unemployed or seeking public assistance for the very first time. We hope that this webinar will clarify many basic questions pertaining to what public benefits are available, who is eligible for them, and how to apply. This webinar will also cover unemployment benefits and provide some clarity to those community members who are concerned about the new public charge requirements that came into effect earlier this year. So with that said, I will hand it over to our presenter, Kristin Hartsaw. Take it away, Kristin. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Michael, and thank you for inviting me to share this information with the community. I was sharing with Michael as we were planning this webinar that it's kind of a treat for me to speak directly to community members because so much of my work in recent years has been involved with training social service providers, healthcare providers, and others on these very complex rules regarding eligibility for public benefits for things like SNAP or food stamps, Medicaid, and more. So it's really a treat for me to get to share this information with all of you. And as Michael said, if you do have questions, please do submit them in the chat function of Zoom. And I will try to pause maybe after each major section to see if there is any information. I would like to share just a quick word about my organization. I work for an organization called DuPage Federation on Human Services Reform, and we are historically based in DuPage County, but I find that our training work in particular really is regional, if not statewide. But we are a small nonprofit organization. We actually do not provide any direct services to families or individuals, but we are very connected to those agencies who do. And that's kind of the other fun part of my job is getting to know agencies like Irish Community Services and others who are really on the front lines helping families and individuals navigate through these human services and public benefits system. So thank you again for inviting me. Tonight, what I'm going to do is just give an overview of the rules that pertain to immigrant eligibility in accessing some of these government benefit programs. So I'm hoping by the end of this program, you'll have a basic understanding of who can access public benefits. Also, we'll talk briefly about how to apply for these benefits. I also want to take a few moments to discuss the impact of the public charge rule. Public charge is something that's been part of immigration law for over 100 years, but the Trump administration in the last year or so has made some changes with regards to that rule, and it's left a lot of families and individuals with more questions, I think. So we'll discuss that. And then, of course, I want to connect you to community resources that can help with all of these topics. So with that, let's get started. I mentioned on the cover slide, I'll mention it again, this information is current basically as of yesterday or the end of June, June 30th. What I have learned is that public benefits information changes frequently, and certainly in these times of uncertainty with COVID-19, the state has been making a lot of changes and enacting some flexibilities with some of these programs due to the public health emergency. I also have to just give a disclaimer that the content in this presentation is meant for informational purposes only. It is not meant to be legal advice. It's not meant to be immigration advice or anything like that. I can explain to you the rules around a lot of these programs and give you an overview of these rules, but I am not an attorney myself, nor am I an immigration accredited representative. So please know that this is just meant for information purposes. and I will give you resources at the end if you do need to connect with any legal assistance. So you've heard me mention at least twice, if not more already, the term public benefits, right? But when we think about public benefits, really, what does that mean in the grand scheme of government benefits in the United States? And tonight's comments really are focused on the state of Illinois benefits. I do realize that Irish Community Services does have a presence in the Midwest. So please keep in mind, many of my comments are tailored towards Illinois, but yet many of the programs ultimately start at the federal level and then are kind of passed on to the states to administer. When we think of public benefits, though, we're talking about everything from health coverage like Medicaid and Medicare. On the social security side of things, we might be thinking of earned benefits even, like retirement insurance or disability insurance or something called survivor's insurance. On the food side of things, we've got a few different programs. SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. You'll sometimes hear community members talk about SNAP by referring to it as food stamps or LINK, because those food benefits are distributed on the LINK debit card. SNAP is a program to provide assistance to low-income families so that they can purchase food items. WIC is another food assistance program. It stands for Women, Infant, and Children. This is usually administered through local health departments in Illinois, although in the city there are a number of community-based agencies and community health centers that help families apply for WIC. It's meant for pregnant women and children up to age 5. Housing assistance from the federal government comes in the form, we still commonly refer to it, we being kind of advocate and provider organizations, we still commonly refer to it as Section 8, but the really official phrasing for it is housing choice vouchers that are administered through HUD, the Housing and Urban Development arm of the federal government. In addition to housing choice vouchers, there might be some project-based assistance and rental assistance. And so there's a significant amount of money that comes into communities under that. But with housing, it gets a little more complicated because then you might also have local assistance programs too. And then another logo I threw up here on the slide is TANF, which stands for Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. This is a monthly cash benefit program for very low income families with children in the home. So that's a lot. And this presentation isn't meant to get into each and every one of these benefits, but just know that there are a number of programs available for families to assist with meeting their basic needs. And so when I train providers, we often talk in detail about each of those programs and, not only what they offer families, but who can get them. And when I first started working in public benefits, it was about 7 years ago. Prior to that, I spent many years working in public health, and I had heard these terms. I had heard about Medicaid, I had heard about Social Security, but I didn't have a very strong understanding of what those programs were or how I would even assist someone in applying. And since then, I've learned a lot, although I will say even doing this work for 7 years, sometimes I still have to ask other experts and look up information because it's very complicated. One of the things that surprised me very early on was that each type of benefit program has its own set of rules. And so figuring out when I'm working with a client, like I used to, when I'm working with someone, do they fit into a category? Is it a pregnant woman? Is it a child? Is it a person living with a disability? Is it someone who is a veteran of the military? Or is it just someone who's low income and maybe they don't fit into one of those categories? So that's that first bullet point, that some programs have criteria based on a category. The state will call that categorical eligibility, but it's just a term to say that, okay, because this person is a child, they may be able to access certain benefits. Or because this person has a disability, there's a set of benefit programs that they may be eligible for. And then on top of category, then each program has different income requirements. They're not all the same. The income limit for a family to access Medicaid is different than the income limit for SNAP. And then also different from cash assistance. So it's not as easy as looking at just one household figure. It's then thinking about the other programs. The good news is that if you were in need of applying for benefits, and even for providers who help families apply for such benefits, is that we can do an initial screening, but people can apply, and then the state of Illinois will determine whether or not, yes, someone's able to get Medicaid and not SNAP, or the reverse. And then there are other qualifiers for programs. And tonight, what I really want to focus is on the immigration status requirements for immigrants to be able to access these benefits. In my work, I've learned that there's often confusion and that people think they are unable to access benefits unless they're a citizen, but that's not the case. So let's move into that content. So tonight, again, I'm going to frame my comments primarily around SNAP cash and most of the Medicaid programs. Please know that there are other programs, federal programs like Medicare, where on top of fitting into an age criteria and so forth, there's not necessarily an income limit, but rather someone has to have had a work history. They still have to have these qualifying immigration statuses for Medicare. And there may be other benefits like that as well. But tonight, I really wanted to focus on the state of Illinois benefits, SNAP, cash, and Medicaid. And you'll hear that with Medicaid, there's a few exceptions to the immigration rules. So years ago, it was actually 1996 that there was a significant piece of federal legislation passed, and it created this term qualified alien. And it really changed the rules around which immigrants, based on their status, were able to get these benefits. I don't personally like the term alien, but that's what's in the legislation. So sometimes I'll say qualifying immigration status or qualifying immigrant. And just know that that means that the person has met the requirements to be able to access public benefits. For most immigrants who enter under family sponsorship, or maybe even they enter the United States through employer sponsorship, and then they seek green card status or lawful permanent resident, LPR status, after 5 years of continuous residence in the United States, if they then find themselves in a situation maybe where they're unemployed, low income, unable to meet their basic needs, after that 5-year bar, they are able to apply for public benefits, as long as they have that green card status and that it's been kind of that continuous residence. But there are a whole host of immigration statuses that do not have that 5-year bar or that 5-year waiting period, if you want to call it that. And those are immigrants who have a special humanitarian status or other special immigrant status. And there's too many to list on the screen, but it includes statuses such as a refugee or an asylee. It could be someone who entered as a designated Cuban or Haitian entrant, maybe another conditional entrant status that is considered protected and a qualifying status. And so this is a point where if someone would be unsure if their immigration status met this, kind of the status in the purple box on the slide, we would connect them with an agency that is well-versed in those statuses and the policy and be able to screen them so they would be able to assist with applications. But for the most part, many people are familiar with this kind of 5-year wait if they're a green card holder. So let's use a couple of examples because I feel like that has always helped me understand complex policy. So in our first example, we have Josie, and she immigrated to the United States back in 2005. She's maintained that permanent resident status for the past 15 years. And so because of that, Josie is considered a qualified immigrant for accessing public benefits. If Josie has found herself, unemployed due to COVID-19 right now, and maybe, struggling to make rent and having a hard time, she is able to apply for the state of Illinois benefits and get that assistance. Then we have Warren. So Warren's only been in the United States for about 4 years. He does have LPR status, so he does have that green card, but he would be considered unqualified for purposes of applying for public benefits. So Warren has a lawful status, but he's unqualified in terms of applying for benefits. So I hope that helps make that a little bit more clear. But nothing is simple when it comes to public benefits, and I've also learned nothing is simple when it comes to the immigration process as well. And it seems like with many programs, we have a series of exceptions. And so, while I've been focusing primarily on things like SNAP and Medicaid and some of those other federal programs, please know there are other programs, some of which do originate with the federal government, that do not require an immigration status. And I've listed them here. But things like nutrition programs such as WIC, or even the free and reduced school lunch program under the umbrella of the National School Lunch Program, that's all about ensuring healthy nutrition for children, and so it does not require an immigration status. There's also some exceptions when it comes to Medicaid. So Medicaid for pregnant women, for the duration of the pregnancy and for up to 60 days after that pregnancy ends, there is no immigration status for pregnant women to access health coverage. They still have to meet the income requirements for all of these programs, but that immigration qualifier is kind of removed from this. Same thing, many people have heard of All Kids, which is the Medicaid program for children in Illinois, and there is no immigration status requirement for children to access that. I also want to point out the emergency Medicaid program for non-citizens. This is an important one, especially now during COVID-19. This is a program for immigrants who would have met all the Medicaid requirements in terms of income limit, Illinois residency, etc. But because they do not have a qualifying immigration status, they are unable to get Medicaid for their regular health care. For the emergency Medicaid program, if they end up in the emergency room at a local hospital due to a life-threatening or sudden onset health condition, maybe, I don't know, heart attack, stroke, something else like that, this is a program that really ultimately is about getting the hospitals paid or reimbursed by the state for that service. And so someone who maybe is uninsured, doesn't have a qualifying immigration status, even persons who might be undocumented and not have any immigration status at all, if they end up in the hospital due to emergency reasons, they can apply for this program. And often it's the hospitals who are helping these individuals apply for this program. I wanted to highlight that a little bit because the state is considering COVID-19 an emergent health condition. I'll say it now and I'll probably repeat it again later, but the state has said they will cover anyone for testing and treatment for COVID-19 regardless of insurance status. And then behind the scenes, it's another story in terms of who does the hospital bill and how does the hospital get reimbursed and so forth. But we really want to make sure that if people are experiencing those symptoms, so please don't delay testing or care. And emergency Medicaid is one program that will help with that. I also just want to mention the charity care programs. There are different programs throughout different communities. In the DuPage County region, we actually have a program called Access DuPage that helps place persons who do not have another form of health insurance. And primarily, we're seeing a lot of undocumented immigrants who are able to enroll in this program, and then it places them with a medical home. So that's one example of a charity care program. But then all hospitals who are considered nonprofit, they must provide charity care as well, so they have to provide a percentage of their care in that way. And then for those of you who may live in Cook County Health and Hospital Systems also has a program known as CareLink. So different regions, again, have different charity care programs that immigrants may be able to take advantage of regardless of their status. However, what we know is that many families may have mixed statuses among them. So you maybe have a parent who is an undocumented non-citizen, another parent that may have a status, and maybe children were born in the United States and therefore have US citizenship. The takeaway that I want people to understand is that even if there are household members who do not have a qualifying immigration status, but other people in the home do have those statuses or they are a citizen, that an application may be filed for those eligible family members. So let's look at an example, because I think that, again, will help make this clear. So in this example, we have Paulo and Daniela, and they are living with their 2 sons. And if you see here that everyone has a different status. Paulo has been a green card holder since 2013. Daniela and Eduardo are also green card holders, but for only the past 3 years. And then Fernando was born in Chicago and is a US citizen. So when we think about that, let's assume that the family meets the income requirements for these programs. Take just a moment, think amongst yourselves, but who might be able to apply for public benefits like SNAP and Medicaid? And I apologize, there's a typo on the slide, but who is able out of these family members to apply for SNAP and Medicaid? If you said Paulo and Fernando, you would be correct. So again, Paulo, green card holder for more than 5 years, Fernando, a citizen. As long as the family meets the requirements, they can apply for benefits for those 2 individuals. Now, when this family applies for Medicaid or SNAP, they need to list everyone on the application. So Paulo, Daniela will be there. They'll be listed as the parents. If Daniela has income, she'll need to report that income. We need Eduardo's information as well, and especially relationship to each other in the home. And these are all things that are asked on these applications for benefits. And then what the state of Illinois will do when assessing SNAP and Medicaid is they will look at the income limits for a household of 4. And then they will use that information to determine whether or not Paulo and Fernando are then eligible for the benefits. So again, Daniela needs to go on the application as well, especially if she has income, but we would not mark on the application that Daniela is requesting benefits. Now with Eduardo, there's an exception. So Eduardo has only been here 3 years, but with All Kids, he is able to get that Medicaid because All Kids doesn't require any immigration status. So it's in this family's interest too to list him. I hope that makes sense, and I hope that's not too complex of an example, but that's really what we're meaning about mixed status households. One more just bit of information in terms of an exception, and I wasn't really sure where to put this information in the presentation, so I decided to put it here just since we were kind of giving examples of benefits. But due to COVID-19, there is another food-related program. It's kind of a special thing, limited time only, public benefit, and it's known as PEBT, or Pandemic EBT. And this is really meant for families who have children in the home between ages 3 and 17, and essentially they've lost access to the free and reduced school lunch program that they would have received because schools are closed. So this is a time-limited benefit that came about because of this. And this happens every now and then when there are emergencies. I know years ago when there was a lot of severe flooding and a disaster declaration was made, they opened up something called Disaster SNAP. So there's always these special programs that will come up depending on what the state of emergency is. But these days it's this COVID-19 related emergency declaration. So this is only for certain dates in March, April, and June, and families must apply by July 15th. If they have not already applied by July 15th, they will not be able to access this benefit. So we really want to make sure that if you know people maybe in this situation, to please encourage them to apply. They do have to meet the income requirements for the National School Lunch Program. So that will be one of the things, if they weren't already receiving free or reduced school lunch, they would have to access that. And then there is an exception for school districts like Chicago Public Schools, that it's like a community eligibility provision within the policy. So if you know families in the city, please encourage them maybe to reach out to an agency or to look into this a little bit further before July 15th. And then there's been a lot of other changes related to COVID-19 with some of the other programs, especially for people already receiving things like SNAP or Medicaid. I'm not going to go into those today. If you do have questions, please feel free to contact me. My email is at the end of this presentation, or you may visit the Department of Human Services website. And if you're in another state, I'm sure your state agency, your state Medicaid agency, or SNAP agency has made similar program changes as well. So this might be a good opportunity if there are questions. I can take a couple questions about what I've covered in terms of immigration status, because then I'm going to shift gears a little bit. So just real quick, putting out a call for questions. And it's okay if there's not any now. You are welcome to email me. That's best these days. Some general questions. All right, so how do we apply for these benefit programs? The best thing to do is to apply online. The state of Illinois does have an online application, abe.illinois.gov. The reason I say it's best to apply there is because then you'll have a record of the application. When people go to this website, they need to create an account. So they create a username and a password. They have to answer some secret questions that are really meant for password recovery. And then it's an application where you start entering household information about each person who lives in the home, their income, and a lot of other information. But it only asks questions based on what you've already previously submitted. Once the application is submitted, it's important to provide or scan and attach any proofs of income, proof of Illinois residency, possibly proof of citizenship or immigration status, and much more. And then once that application is submitted, the person gets an application tracking ID number, and then they have this account moving forward. You can also apply for SNAP and Medicaid over the phone. You can't apply for cash assistance over the phone, but I will warn you, this call center often has long wait times, and so that can be challenging, especially if you have limited minutes on your phone. You do have the right to mail or fax a paper application in as well, and that can be a good option for people, but I would just kind of make note of when you submitted. Sometimes those applications seem to never get to where they need to be, and I think it's just simply due to the volume of applications often going into the agency. And then currently, I don't think I made it clear, but it's the Illinois Department of Human Services who processes these applications, and they have a number of local offices, which are known as Family Community Resource Centers. Now, currently, due to COVID-19, these local offices are closed, but when they are open to the public, some people do walk in to make an application, and it varies by local office. Some offices may hand the person a paper application, say go ahead, fill it out, and then drop it off in a drop box up at the front counter. Others may have them sit and wait to talk to a DHS caseworker, a human services caseworker. But we are of the mindset, we being kind of providers who work with clients frequently around these applications, that the best thing to do is to complete an online application. I didn't put it in the presentation, but it kind of popped into my head, so please let me share. It will ask, as part of the online application, it will ask applicants to complete an electronic identity proofing process. This is very similar to credit history type of questions. Things like, you used to live on Washington Street. In what city was that? Or you graduated from Abraham Lincoln High School. What town was that high school in? Or credit history type of questions that only you, the applicant, would be able to answer. The reason for this is due to some data security rules. And I am only mentioning that because some people see that as part of the online application and they can't get through that. Especially newer immigrants who may not have a credit history or haven't banked for long in the United States. You know, it's very difficult to answer those questions, and then they can't complete the electronic identity proofing. Please know that there is an option in the application side of things to just click a button that says verify identity later, and you can still go ahead and submit that online application. It is necessary to complete that identity proofing if you want to use what's known as the ABE customer portal or manage my case. And this is like online banking, except it's for your state of Illinois benefits. So if that is something you need more information on, we can again connect you to an agency that assists with those kind of things, or you're welcome to email me those general questions, and I can even connect you with an agency who has staff that help with this. And this is a sample, and I'm giving you another link at the end, but this is just a sample of some of the agencies that are assisting. Protecting Immigrant Families Illinois is a statewide coalition, and so you will find this list available on their website. This is only the first half of the first page of this document, so please know it is broken down statewide in Illinois. And then the other resource, which you'll have later in the presentation, is ICIRR, or the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights. And we will, again, get you that link, but this list is also available on their website. But these agencies have staff that have been trained in kind of navigating the Department of Human Services system and trained in public benefits. I've had the pleasure to speak to a number of these agencies at the ICIRR office, and I know they are diligently working to serve their communities, and they really are devoted to helping people navigate this complex system. All right, so before I get into public charge, let me just stop again and see. I think a question came in. So let me just double check. Oh, great. So that was just Michael to remind us to put them in the chat box. Thank you.
Yeah, we haven't had any questions come through. I've been monitoring it.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So far I've kind of talked a little bit about public benefits, talked a little bit about those qualifying immigration statuses to access public benefits. But many people have heard about this term public charge, especially over the last 2 years, right? And so many people have fear or concerned, you know, will applying for any of these benefits or will receiving these benefits prevent me from being able to adjust my immigration status? And I wish I could give you a simple answer, but there is no simple answer. The answer is it's complicated. So I mentioned at the outset, public charge has been around for over 100 years. It's been a part of immigration law for a long, long time. And for many, many years, immigration officials, what they were really looking at when it came to public charge was, whether or not an immigrant was likely to be dependent on the government for support. If yes, they would maybe be considered a public charge, but in the past, if that person had a sponsor and a signed affidavit of support from a sponsor, that weighed very heavily on the person's application for permanent residence. And so we didn't see public charge come up very often. But that changed, and I'm trying to remember the exact timeline now, and that's probably not as important at this point, but the current Trump administration had made changes, proposed changes to the public charge rule. And then last October, they published a final rule, and it drastically changed the definition of what it meant to be for public charge. And this rule did go into effect even in Illinois on February 24th, 2020, so just a couple months ago. So I mentioned it drastically changed the definition of public charge. It's very future looking. It's basically looking at whether or not when an immigrant is applying for permanent residence, meaning a green card, whether or not they're likely at any point in the future to become dependent, or excuse me, to need public benefits. That's pretty broad. That's a pretty broad definition, and it's very future looking. And how does an immigration official determine that? Well, one of the ways they proposed and have implemented is something called the totality of circumstances. And so now they've set out a number of weighted factors that will help an immigration official determine, based on age or income, et cetera, whether or not that immigrant is likely to become a public charge. In addition, in the past, they only looked at public benefits in terms of needing cash assistance or government paid long-term care, so basically Medicaid for nursing home care. And what this new revised rule has done is expanded the list of benefits. So I am going to walk through some slides here that get a little bit more into detail about this, but I hopefully will make it clear to you like who is and is not subject to this public charge test. And it's not like a test you take, like a naturalization test. It's more so filling out paperwork and additional forms and really getting at all of these weighted factors that immigration is seeking. So the first thing to really remember and understand is, when does public charge come up? And basically, immigration is going to do this assessment when an individual is applying to enter the United States. And so for many of our community-based agencies, we usually don't see these folks because they're applying overseas through the consular processing. Some agencies here may deal with that, but for most of the folks I train anyway, that's not usually who they're working with. It also comes up when an individual is applying to adjust status, so they're applying to obtain or to become a green card holder. You'll notice becoming a citizen is not on this list. And then public charge may also come up for current green card holders if they leave the United States for more than 6 months consecutively, or 180 consecutive days. Let's say they spend part of the year back in their country of origin, and then they kind of split their time between there and the United States. If they're gone for more than 180 consecutive days, upon re-entry, they could be asked to kind of go through this process. So this is it. If someone already has a green card, there is no public charge test unless they leave the country for that length of time. There is no public charge test for a green card holder who is seeking naturalization and becoming a citizen. It's really these folks, those folks who are applying to become a green card holder. In addition, again, it's complicated. In addition, there are a number of immigration statuses who are exempt from public charge. And so even if they are in the process of applying for a green card, their immigration status exempts them from having this assessment completed. So many of those humanitarian statuses are on that list. And this is just a sampling of statuses of whom public charge does not apply to. So refugees, asylees. VAWA is Violence Against Women Act. Even though women is in the name, it's for women or men and boys as well. It's persons who are survivors of domestic violence when the citizen is the abuser. So they may be an immigrant, but their abuser is a citizen, and it's a form of immigration relief. U visas and T visas are also a form of immigration relief for victims of violence, trafficking, or other serious crimes. So there's a lot of protected statuses here who are not subject to public charge. So that's one of my messages. Public charge doesn't apply to every immigrant. I already said it, but it bears repeating. I've heard too many stories from my providers that I work with who have talked about, oh, they canceled their WIC benefits for their children because they're going through naturalization process. And we're always trying to convey that, no, you know, the rule doesn't impact people who are current green card holders unless they leave. And WIC isn't even one of those benefits. So that's like two issues in one with that example I just shared. Also, once they already have their green card and how you have to go through the renewal process, there is no public charge at that point. And if someone is already a citizen, so they've completed the naturalization process, there is no public charge rule in the future. Once someone is naturalized, they're a US citizen for all intents and purposes. So I mentioned the benefits programs as well. So for a long time, the old public charge rule, it was basically, like I said, cash assistance and long-term care. And then what the new rule did was add in other benefits, things like the SNAP program, things like some of those federal HUD-funded housing assistance programs, and then also the, regular Medicaid for adults. However, there are many exceptions with Medicaid, and while it's on this slide, I actually made another slide for it because I just feel like it's so important. So again, only programs that are listed in the rule do not count toward public charge. And with Medicaid, they have exempted or made exceptions for that emergency Medicaid for non-citizens that I described a little bit ago. Also Medicaid for children through age 21. This kind of accounts especially for some of the Medicaid coverage through the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, some of the support services that children with disabilities receive from their school districts. So Medicaid up to age 21, that's an exception, does not count if someone's receiving that. And then also Medicaid for pregnant women up through that 60 days postpartum. Also, I mentioned it before, but I think I did anyway, the COVID testing and treatment not subject to public charge either. So I'm gonna go back a slide again to just kind of review that yes, if someone would be using these benefits, you know, use of those benefits for the immigrant who's applying for public charge could be a factor. And now let me go back. But if you think about what I just shared at the beginning, I'm jumping to the bottom bullet point on this slide first, is that people who are subject to the public charge test, in the most part, they're not eligible for the benefits that count. Remember, I said that to access public benefits like Medicaid and SNAP, you have to be a green card holder for at least 5 years. So in this case, the only way it's gonna affect that green card holder is if they leave the country for more than 6 months at a time. There are some other exceptions possibly with immigration statuses, but for the most part, we're talking about a pretty small number of people who might be able to get public benefits and also be subject to public charge. So I have started to tell even the providers that I train, let's not focus so much on benefits use. Yes, it's a consideration. Yes, we need to think about it. But you're going to see in a future slide, it's really much more the totality of circumstances that immigrants need to think about when it comes to public charge. I also just want to mention the public charge rule does not count benefits used by eligible family members. So if we go back to my example earlier with Daniela and Paulo, and we changed their example a little bit, and maybe, let's say Daniela did not have a status, but now is going and submitting an application for a green card. If her children were receiving all kids, or even if other benefits, her children's use of benefits don't count against her public charge assessment. It's only her use of benefits that would. Again, it's complex, I know. I think by design, it's confusing and complex. So you've heard me mention this totality of circumstances. Again, this is how the Department of Homeland Security is attempting to inform U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services officials how they should look at an applicant, a green card applicant's information to determine whether or not they might be subject to public charge. And so they've created these weighed factors. Things like age. If someone is under age 18 or over age, I believe is it 60 or 64, that could be considered a negative factor in someone's assessment for public charge, because they're really looking at someone's ability to work. Education and skills is another weighed factor. And so if someone does not speak English very well, maybe they don't have a higher degree of education, maybe they're not skilled labor that's needed in a particular region of the United States, that also could be a negative factor in this totality of circumstances assessment. Health condition. If someone has a disability or a high cost health condition that also maybe prevents them from working, that can be a negative factor against them. Family size, a larger family size could also be considered negative, and income also matters. If families are low income, especially based on family size, again, they're looking at that as a potential negative factor on someone's application. So again, it's not so much the use of public benefits, but it's more so all of these different circumstances that might make someone be considered a public charge. And so how are they doing that? Well, there's a new form. It's the I-944 form that went into effect on February 24th. It's called the Declaration of Self-Sufficiency. And even though it's a form, it's really more of a booklet. It's 18 pages long, runs through everything, you know, financial history, income, education, whether or not someone owns property, and yes, public benefits use. So we haven't heard too much yet about folks who've been filling out these forms and submitting them with their green card applications. We realize it kind of, you know, went into effect right before a lot of the shutdowns of offices and stuff started happening. But I can assure you that here in Illinois, there are a number of advocate agencies working with the Illinois Department of Human Services to see what they need to help provide immigrants who are in need of filling out these forms. But this form's really going to get at all of that totality of circumstances. So this is a lot of information about public charge, and there's a few talking points I just want to emphasize. First of all, the rule is not retroactive. It did go into effect on February 24th of 2020. So, you know, it can't look at past benefits use with some of those newer listed benefits before February 24th. The totality of circumstances test, all of that. Any application for a green card that was submitted before February 24th essentially should use the old rules. Again, let me just remind you too that not every immigrant is subject to the rule, and each situation is different. So if you have questions about that, please seek advice from an immigration attorney or an accredited representative. I also find it helpful to just think through some questions. And so this is actually borrowed from a fact sheet from Protecting Immigrant Families Illinois. I serve on the steering committee for that group. Our agency is active with trying to advocate around this. So I have the permission to borrow from that fact sheet, but you will find it on their website if you want to refer back to it in the future. So just some questions, you know, do you and your family members already have green cards? Then this public charge test, and in this case, DHS's Department of Homeland Security, this public charge test does not apply to you. However, as a green card holder, if you plan to leave again for those 6 months consecutively, that could be a concern and you may want to seek advice. Another question, do you have any of these statuses? If yes, then the public charge test doesn't apply to those categories listed there. Those are those exempt categories. Here's a couple questions, kind of the caution light, right? The stop light, caution light. Do you plan to apply for a green card from inside? And if you're not sure whether or not this policy applies to you, you may want to seek advice. And same thing, a little different answer for if the family is applying for a green card from outside of the US through consular processing. Those offices abroad do use different rules. So again, needing to connect with that expert immigration advice. If you are in need of free or low cost options, this is one resource to look up for legal assistance. Another option here locally in Illinois is to contact the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights Family Support Hotline, and they can also make referrals. They also have a listing of a directory of legal services on their website. And here's a couple more common questions that we do see. So we, you know, someone who was granted asylum is worried about using SNAP. And again, a reminder that someone who has been granted asylum is not subject to public charge. The next question is about pregnancy. And again, reminding that Medicaid for pregnant women is also exempt from public charge. I love the last question or the example. You know, my friend says that public charge is going to apply to her and told me I need to cancel my SNAP benefits too. And just a reminder, everyone's situation is different. And so before making any decisions, we encourage people to reach out to those experts who can help give that advice. I kind of already gave this example with WIC. You know, I'm scared to sign up for WIC. I know that WIC is a public benefit. And yes, it is. But WIC itself and using WIC is not included in the public charge test. And then a couple of more examples that are similar. So coverage under my Medicaid plan is what my children have. I'm concerned about that. And the kids' use of benefits does not count. And then someone whose brother is going through the naturalization process, brother is receiving some of the HUD Section 8 housing vouchers. And again, that does not apply to them. It doesn't apply because they are already going for citizenship and there's no public charge test at that time. Oops, I forgot to delete that slide, sorry. That's a repeat. We'll just keep going. Okay, so who can provide immigration advice? You've heard me say accredited rep, you've heard me say immigration attorney, and so I think that's just really important to emphasize, and I won't spend a lot of time on that. But you really want to make sure it is an immigration attorney. If you use an attorney who does not specialize in immigration, I have heard of cases with immigration that have gotten messed up or held up because of that, because paperwork wasn't filed correctly. There's also something known as the Department of Justice Accredited Representative, and these are organizations and individuals who've gone through certain training and have demonstrated knowledge, proficiency, and work in this arena. And so folks who are designated as an accredited representative also are able to give immigration advice. And then law students who are under supervision of an immigration attorney also can. And again, I've given you the Immigration Advocates link for a legal directory. This is a nationwide directory. And that's kind of the conclusion of my public charge comments. Again, I refer people to Protecting Immigrant Families Illinois all the time. Please check it out if you have questions about public charge. I'm going to shift gears now and talk about unemployment. This is kind of the last section of tonight's webinar. And I've separated it out from some of the other public benefits because unemployment insurance is just like it sounds, it's insurance. It's not necessarily, while it is provided by the government, it's not necessarily a public benefit like we think of in terms of public aid, because it is an earned benefit. So first, what I wanted to do was just kind of review quickly traditional unemployment insurance, and then I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the changes that have come about because of the COVID-19 emergency. So before we get there though, let's think about traditional or regular unemployment. Essentially, to access unemployment insurance, a worker who's become unemployed must have been working in a job covered by unemployment insurance. So this means they've been working for a company or an employer that pays into the unemployment system. They have worked and earned a certain amount of money within a certain period of time frame before becoming unemployed and needing this benefit. In addition, they need to have become unemployed through no fault of their own. So they were, laid off, or maybe the company closed, or whatever the case may be. They can't have been fired because of maybe, for whatever, they were stealing or negligent on the job or whatever case might be. And then they also, to receive unemployment, have to be able and available to return to work. And so they have to register with the job search program. And here in Illinois, that's known as Illinois Job Link. They have to be seeking work, and they have to document their work searches. And so how many jobs they've applied to every week, if they've had interviews, what the outcome of those interviews, and much more. So that's traditional unemployment. Currently, the maximum benefits that someone could receive per week, again, for traditional unemployment, is $484 a week for a time frame of up to 26 weeks. So that's for regular traditional unemployment. And we'll talk about the extra layers that have come with COVID-19. However, I just want to emphasize, not everyone receives that maximum $484 a week. There's a formula that they calculate based on, again, kind of their history of salary in the time period before needing unemployment. A word about immigrant access to unemployment. Yes, immigrants can access unemployment if they've worked in those jobs and if they have had valid work authorization. So that includes everyone from LPRs. It even includes DACA recipients, so our Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, who are authorized to work. They have that valid Social Security number for work purposes only. And then I've listed a couple other statuses as well. That as long, again, as the immigrant has that valid work permit, they are able to access unemployment if they become unemployed. And that valid work authorization has to have been effective or in effect, I guess you could say, both while they were earning their salary, while they're receiving unemployment, and while they're looking for work. And again, it's an earned benefit, so I just want to mention that unemployment is generally, it's not subject to public charge because, again, you have had to have been working to earn this benefit. So let's talk about what's changed. And actually, before I even get into the programs listed on this slide, I'll also mention that early on with the pandemic, there were some flexibilities with regards to unemployment. So if a business was closed and not able to pay their employees, people could file for unemployment, and if it was considered like a temporary layoff or furlough, they could not have to register with JobLink because the intention is that they were going to go back to their regular job once it reopened. So there was some flexibility with that. Also, if they were put on quarantine and having to stay home from work and their employer was not able to pay them during that quarantine, they could also apply. But you'll hear in a moment how challenging it is to apply for unemployment. All right, so what forms of unemployment insurance relief have come about because of COVID-19? These are a result of the federal legislation packages that came out, like in, what was that, March, early April? It's all a blur at this point. The first is something called pandemic unemployment compensation, but this is for people who are currently or are on unemployment. It provides an extra $600 per week. So if people were receiving that, $484 per week, or maybe they weren't eligible for the maximum $484, but rather receiving $300 a week, this PUC program provided them an extra $600 per week. That goes through July 25th unless Congress takes action. As of today, which is July 2nd, there's no real movement there. But things can change, you never know. If things don't happen by end of July, Congress does go on recess for all of August, so likely nothing would happen until September then, but that's getting into civics. So let's get back to unemployment. The next type of relief that came through is pandemic emergency unemployment compensation. Basically, this is extending the time frame from 26 weeks to a total of 39 weeks for people who were eligible for traditional unemployment. So if they had maybe just run out, maybe they'd been on unemployment since last December, let's say, and still looking for work but hadn't found any, and then run out of their 26 weeks, they can continue receiving for a maximum of 39 weeks total. And then the third category is probably one that's of most interest to many people. I call it the 1099 unemployment, or the gig worker unemployment. This is for people who were left out of traditional unemployment because they worked in a job not covered by unemployment insurance. They're either self-employed, maybe they're a musician, maybe they are, they do handyman work. Maybe they clean homes for a living, and they're self-employed and they're paid cash, and maybe they file taxes with a 1099 or some other mechanism. That's what this program really is about, pandemic unemployment assistance. So it's that emergency unemployment for people who just can't access it. It's also available for people who maybe do work in covered employment but hadn't worked long enough in that job, or hadn't worked enough hours, hadn't earned enough salary to meet the requirements of traditional unemployment. And these folks, once they get this assistance, they'll also be eligible for 39 weeks, but the reality is that the way the relief package was written, these payments will stop at the end of the year, at the end of 2020. This is the unemployment category that wasn't available until May 11th in terms of filing a claim for unemployment. So when people went to the Illinois Department of Employment Security website, the state had to build the application system for this third category of relief. So the earliest claims could be filed were May 11th, but if someone had been unemployed since March in this category, the benefits are supposed to be retroactive. I'm trying to think if there's something else I wanted to say about that, but let's go to the next slide and talk about kind of process. Because what, in theory should be happening, we know isn't always the reality, and there's been some challenges with filing claims for unemployment, and these were unprecedented times. The volume of applications coming in, even the regular system, the state's computer system was at least 10 years old, and was in need of updating. They needed to build this whole component for this relief package. So there have been challenges, and currently the local offices that are out there are currently closed, and people need to file their claims online. So just know that there have been challenges. But again, once benefit applications, or I should say claims filed and processed for unemployment, it will be retroactive. I feel like the IDES agency has done a good job of updating their website, so I would encourage you to go there. They even have some video messages and explanation of their processes. So that's probably the best place for information about unemployment. And especially for those who live in Cook County and needing assistance, Legal Aid Chicago is an agency that is providing a lot of assistance. But even if you don't live in Cook County, their website has a wealth of information regarding unemployment. They have some fact sheets about unemployment and immigrants in particular, and just different releases and fact sheets for persons who are in need. So I would encourage you to check that out if you are running into issues with unemployment. And then who else can help, right? This is one thing I wanted to do, was make sure that people knew who was available to assist. So earlier in the presentation, remember I showed that screenshot of those public charge informational centers. The Immigrant Family Resource Program is a partnership between the Illinois Department of Human Services and other entities, and the big entity in Illinois is ICER, or Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, and then they subcontract with a number of different agencies, and they train those agencies on navigating those systems. So there's a couple of different places where you can access a listing of these agencies. When it comes to health coverage questions, Medicaid, or even other health insurance, there's a whole workforce, licensed workforce, known as certified application counselors. This workforce came out of the Affordable Care Act work that was done, and you can search by zip code on the Get Covered Illinois website. So I would encourage you to check that out as well. And then a few more resources. So I've already mentioned our partners at ICER. The DuPage Federation, we work very closely with ICER on some of this work, as well as language access issues, access to interpreters and things like that. I've also mentioned Protecting Immigrant Families Illinois, and so here is the website listed for you. I also mentioned Legal Aid Chicago a moment ago, but listing it again here. And then also just wanted to share getcareillinois.org. This is plain language information about health insurance, both private insurance and Medicaid, because we know how complicated our American healthcare system can be. It's not like the government covers everyone like in some countries. I wish it was different, but that's our reality. And so navigating the healthcare system and different payers can be challenging for both us as consumers and our providers as well. So it's a lot of information. This is me, Kristin, again, at the DuPage Federation. I encourage you to check out our website as well. We have some information. Some of it's geared towards providers, but other information is general as well. We have a guide for Illinois Medicaid on there and some other information.